without further ado, let's get it.
So, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Hopefully, everybody's doing well this evening, wherever you're at. Just gonna break down pretty much defense and my perspective of it. So, I have some notes to read off here. So, basically, the psychology of defense. Defense is the most used category of combat. It is innate within almost all species to have sound defensive mechanisms. Offense is the act of inflicting damage. Defense is the act of preservation, the basis of life. Hence its ease of entry when displayed in combat. It is far easier to be defensive than it is to be offensive. Defense, when used effectively, should not only neutralize potentially harmful blows by rendering them ineffective, but to also force opponents into inactivity. Making an opponent defensive is a psychological manipulation before it is a physical one. Forcing an opponent, even briefly, into fighting at the wrong time and place, fleeing from impending danger, or freezing in the midst of the unknown is a psychological skill. The highest level of defense is the ability to disallow the opponent to do whatever it is that they want to do. It's high-level intervention. Everything they do is always met with an obstruction of some kind. That being said, I have something called I and I, which stands for inactivity and ineffectiveness. Inactivity means to render the opponent into a constant state of discomfort or confusion. Typically makes the opponent defensive. And effectiveness is when the offense is either entirely missed or landing in a directly inconsequential manner. So spacing is basically defense by stepping backwards and away. The effectiveness of the opponent's offense at a high level comes from the ability to set punches up. This can come from jabs, probes, leads, feints, angles, manipulations, and power punches are effective when a target chooses to maintain a standstill positioning or to be called, or what I call top heavy. It means to be defensive up top as opposed to down low with your feet. This subsequently allows a fighter to fire power punches at the end of their jab or to break their jab range to cut the distance and engage in a closer offensive. The counter to dealing with an opponent who looks for a standstill target and a 50-50 is to increase the spacing between themselves and their opponent. Essentially, it resets the offending fighter's setups to step one and allows the defensive fighter to gain time and space to familiarize themselves with their opponent's tendencies. In a high-level fight, thinking long-term serves a better purpose than short-term executions. It takes time to see patterns, and spacing offers the ability to understand what tools your opponent has and can subsequently take advantage of later on in the fight. People have to understand when it comes to defense, a part of taking defense away, to have solid defense, you have to have anticipation. You have to know what it is that's about to come at you in order to respond correctly to defend against it. And if you make the wrong choice, if you parry something that you probably should have slipped, if you slip something you probably should have blocked, there might not be a second chance. So just keep that in mind. So proximity is basically defense by stepping forwards or maintaining ground against an over-advancing opponent, aka smother. Proximity it's employed by level changing and standing ground against an over-advancing opponent or taking a penetration step, which is what that's called in wrestling when you go for a takedown, to move forward and close the distance into a hold or clinch. Now, you're not taking them down. The penetration step is just a way to cut the distance as a guy moves forward. This can allow for inside work. You can then spin, or you can spin to get your back off the ropes. Or the referee can come and break and reset both fighters to then move to the center of the ring. People have to understand one of the best ways to set up proximity is going back to point one with spacing. If you're always moving backwards when an opponent uses aggression, when they get used to the idea that you're always going to move backwards, they may decide, okay, I'm going to need a double jab. I'm going to need a triple jab in order to cut the distance to get close to this guy. You go ahead and you make the adjustment, very subtle, to drop your level as they go aggro, and then you go in. You can go for underhook or a duck under, as it's called in wrestling, and you can tie them up, and you can do what you do from there. You're not always going to be able to get your distance from your opponent. You're not always going to be able to have spacing. So sometimes you're going to have to get defense by colliding with your opponent safely and forcing a reset from there. So dead zone is essentially the space between two fighters. The occupation of the space can establish the threat of offense, forcing the opponent to resort to a defensive state. It can be used as a tripwire to draw leads to break range control, or to sucker the opponent to play the game too, aka hand fighting. And then you could use that hand fighting to leverage into your own offense. In understanding dead space, it changes in accordance to someone's range, or not the range, but the wingspan, right? Someone who has a longer wingspan than you can punch you from a further distance than you can hit them. But once you get to the point in which you can both hit one another, the occupation of this zone with whatever have you, probes, feints, anything, the punch traffic, can force your opponent to feel like they have to keep their hands at home to play defense, even if you haven't actually thrown a legitimate blow yet. So evasion is pretty much cut and dry. It's your upper body defense that relates to your head positioning. Slipping, ducking, weaving, any of those motions. These are typically ways to make offense ineffective. Not necessarily inactive, though. Just because you can move your head doesn't necessarily mean that your opponent is not going to stop throwing blows. As a matter of fact, sometimes it can be dangerous if you're dealing with guys that are skilled at using manipulations, which we'll talk about further along in the video, because you can give up your shoulders, you can give up the back of your neck, and an opponent can put their hands on you physically, grappling-wise, to control you and keep you in a position that you don't want to be in for very long. Nonetheless, you still want to be able to move your head because it has implications of how you set your offense up. It can adjust how you present yourself, how you check your presentation, from which side, left, center, and right, you start your offense from. Now for deflection. This upper body defense relates to moving a blow into a different direction. For instance, shoulder rolling. Shoulder rolling, essentially, you're going with the flow of a punch. So for closed stance, orthodox v orthodox, southpaw v southpaw, when you use a shoulder roll, the whole point is to have the right hand go where it goes. You move with the motion of the right hand. And as your opponent finishes the right hand, they will be there for you to counter with the right hand of your own. They may pop back to the center line. They may stay with their weight on their lead foot, which could give you an opportunity for a right uppercut. There are also different options of being able to deflect and to take advantage of the direction that a blow is going, to subsequently go with it and to attack from there. Now understand also, if your timing is poor on using something like a shoulder roll, there have been many examples of people getting creased for trying to do it when they have no business doing it. So interception is just the upper body defense that relates to blocking the trajectory of incoming blows. Just when you're on the center line and punches are going through the center line, you basically want to put your gloves in the direction, your elbows, right, if you're catching a body shot, to intercept where the punch is going to your target area. This is effective in taking away or the immediate target area, right? I'd rather a guy hit me on the arms and on the hands and the elbow than to my jaw and to my liver, to my ribs. However, like you said earlier, with defense, if a guy hits really hard, it's going to be uncomfortable nonetheless. But it's better than nothing. We'll put it that way. So manipulation, aka grappling, is the physical control of head, limbs, specifically the arms because we're in boxing, and trunk, which is the torso, to acquire superior positioning and neutralize offensive efforts. Grappling is an essential part of hand-to-hand combat. Even if you're fighting off the streets and, let's just say the rules are to keep it to hand-to-hand combat, but people are going to try to take each other down, right? That's just innate within us to go for that. We're not all just throwing punches and kicks. This defensive skill set has the ability to break an opponent's posture, to gain superior positioning, and ruin their offensive and defensive timing. Essentially, manipulations can be used, like I said, on limbs, trunk, torso, and opponent. You need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, you won't always have the ability to bring your hands home after your offense. There are going to be times when you're going to need to put your hands on your opponent to avoid having counter punches come your way, and sometimes just to stifle their motions as they come forward. George Foreman is a fantastic, I'm so glad, James, that you used him, example of being able to control a man to take an angle, whether it be a dual post to the shoulders, to take elbow control and use it as a lever to move off to the right, to the left, and to then utilize his own offense. There's a huge game when it comes to manipulations that people have to understand. Combat's all about just throwing punches and then bringing it back to your face. I got to give credit to Barry Robinson from Million Styles Boxing. Fantastic work in terms of understanding disposition, and then from what I bring with ritualized aggression, he does break down disposition beautifully. So I suggest people go to his Instagram, find his content, and really take the time to digest it. But going on from that, ritualized aggression, it's like a dog showing its teeth. Or if anybody's ever seen tarantulas, it's like tarantulas when they stand up on their hind legs. So it's a natural defensive mechanism that animals will have in different shapes and sizes, different forms. And so what it basically is, it's the look to provide intent. When a dog shows you its teeth, it's letting you know, without contact being made, I'm gonna mess you up if you keep going. If you get closer, you keep touching me, right? It's a defensive mechanism that's meant to put the opponent back. It's to keep them back. And so that look doesn't necessarily mean that something has to happen. It can buy you time, right? And so the way that happens in a fight is you adjust your hand position. You can make yourself look bigger, right? You adjust your pace of motion. You can move slower. You can move faster. You can adjust your head slots, right? By changing your head slots to the lead leg, you can position yourself closer. When you position your head slot to the back leg, it makes you look like you're further away, right? These elements provide a look, again, that can provide a certain context of a fighter's intent, right? That's what makes guys feel like, okay, something might come my way. In high-level fighting, really not even high-level fighting, but fighting in general, people need to understand that threats, psychological threats, play a major role in an opponent switching from offense to defense and vice versa. If you are skilled at providing a certain look to your opponent, you'll make them feel defensive without anything even happening. So take 5, again, I have to give credit to Barry Robinson on Disengagement, is the ability to use footwork to reset and walk away, circle out from a potential or current engagement. This forces the opponent to pick up the feet and follow the next positioning, subsequently taking away their setup, while the other fighter taking 5 can take the lead in their offensive setup. Now, people need to understand, especially for the fans who may not have a lot of experience in fighting or used to watching it, you don't want to take every engagement that you get into. That's not very smart, because again, there are a lot of variables that go into the type of blows that are going to be coming your way. And despite how skilled, even looking at Shakur Stevenson is, he can still get hit. Everybody does. Everybody will. Floyd has been hit, hurt. James Toney has been hit and hurt. Some of the greatest defensive fighters of all time have been hit and hurt. So you have to, at times, understand when an opponent is looking to go aggro, sometimes, okay, you step away. You notice that they may have the advantage in how they're setting you up. So you go ahead and say, all right, I'm going to take that away from you. I'm going to reset your work. I'm going to force you to pick up your feet. And then when I'm ready to fight, when I'm ready to have my setups, I'm going to dictate when that happens. It's very important to not take every single engagement. Know when you want to engage. I call it a foil, because I see it as more than just having your standard jab. But an educated lead hand can dictate the dead zone, what we talked about before, aka the space between two fighters. Having a jab alone is not always a mark of a high level lead, but being able to adjust the pacing and angles of lead hand usage is important. It is essentially the closest hand to the opponent, thus the shortest path of travel. It's very important to vary how you use your lead hand. You see it with posts, you see it in probes, whether that can be a left hook, just adjusting how you utilize your lead hand, because you're not always going to be able to just snap your jab out there, especially if your opponent has skilled jab defense. If they're good at parrying your jab and catching your jab, you may want to adjust and kind of throw a probing left hook to get them to think that you can throw left hook whenever you want to. Then you can get back onto the jab. You subsequently shown them 2 different offensive options with that alone, or offensive possibilities. So having a lead hand is very good. You can't just not have a lead hand and resort to power punching whenever you want to. You have to be able to understand the complexity of a fight with a jab and at the end of a jab, and without a jab when you get past jab range. Tracks the position that fighters are in when facing each other. It's the act of getting off the line that you and your opponent are sharing and onto a different one just means that a fighter has effectively taken an angle, either left or right. This angle can be deeper over, off to the left or the right, essentially taking away most, if not all, of an opponent's offensive ability and defensive integrity. Most fights occur on the same track. I call that track 1. So when you're standing in front of a guy on 50-50, when 2 fighters standing in front of one another, that's when I'm talking about the line right down the middle of both fighters' stances that they share. Now, when you get off that track and onto an angle, you are neutralizing your opponent's effectiveness in a fight. Again, I would argue probably entirely, depending on how deep you step over. They can't hit you, and defensively their options are extremely limited. First point, self-preservation, is the protection of life and limb. The second point is timing acquisition, aka pattern recognition. Utility of defense to establish offense in the future. Third point is to reset. It's to take away the position of the potential upcoming or current engagement. The fourth one, counters, is punishment of offensive efforts off of defensive tactics. Fifth point is positioning. That's the landscape of engagements. The sixth point is to demoralize. It's to make an opponent self-conscious of their offensive efforts due to their blows being missed or countered. And to the seventh point, which is dangerous, it's ego. It's showing off. This is showmanship. It's flashy, but it's also incredibly dangerous.